12-year-old Michael Weston, an adventurous boy from a quiet suburban neighborhood, never imagined his love for nature photography would place him in the middle of a sinister plot. On a crisp fall afternoon, while wandering the dense forest near his home in search of bird nests for a school project, Michael stumbled upon a scene that would change his life forever. Hidden behind a cluster of thick bushes, he watched in horror as two men, Officer Darren Griggs and Detective Alan Rivers, worked frantically to dig a shallow grave. A tarp stained with blood lay ominously nearby, its contents unmistakable. Michael's heart pounded as he crouched low, gripping the bark of a nearby tree for support, his small frame trembling with fear. Rivers, the more dominant of the two, barked orders at Griggs, who seemed visibly uneasy. "Keep digging, Darren," Rivers growled, his voice sharp with impatience. "We don't have all day, and the less time we spend here, the better." Griggs hesitated, his face pale as he glanced nervously at the tarp. "Alan, this wasn't the plan," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "We were supposed to scare him, not—" Rivers cut him off with a glare, his tone cold and menacing. "You don't get to question me now. You're in this just as deep as I am, so stop whining and dig." Michael's breath caught in his throat as he shifted his weight, inadvertently snapping a twig beneath his sneaker. The sound was faint, but in the quiet of the woods, it was enough to catch Rivers's attention. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the tree line with laser focus. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his hand instinctively moving to the gun holstered at his hip. Griggs tried to dismiss it, his voice shaky. "Probably just a squirrel or something." But Rivers wasn't convinced. "Squirrels don't break branches like that," he muttered, his expression darkening. Michael froze, every muscle in his body tense as he willed himself to disappear. The seconds felt like hours as Rivers's piercing gaze swept over the area. Finally, he lowered his hand, grumbling, "Let's just finish this and get out of here." Relieved but still terrified, Michael remained rooted in place until the men had completed their grim task, scattered leaves and branches over the freshly turned soil, and disappeared down the trail. Only when he could no longer hear the crunch of their boots or the hum of their patrol car engine did Michael dare to move. Tears streamed down his face as he stumbled out of the woods, his mind racing with fear and disbelief. Bursting through the front door of his modest home, he found his mother, Sarah Weston, in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Startled by his sudden entrance, she turned to him, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as she took in his pale face and trembling frame. "Michael, what's wrong?" she asked, setting down the knife. "They buried someone," Michael blurted out, his voice breaking. "Two men, cops. I saw them in the woods." Sarah's eyes widened in alarm, and she placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Slow down, sweetheart. What are you talking about?" Michael repeated his story, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. By the time he finished, Sarah's face was ashen. "We need to tell someone," Michael insisted, his small fists clenched with determination. But Sarah shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, Michael. We can't." His father, Tom Weston, entered the room, drawn by the commotion. A former investigative journalist who had faced his fair share of threats in the past, Tom listened intently as Michael recounted what he had seen. His jaw tightened, and he exchanged a worried glance with Sarah. "This is serious," Tom said, his tone grave. "If what Michael says is true, those men need to be stopped." But Sarah was adamant. "We can't, Tom. You know what happens in this town to people who cross the wrong ones. Do you want them coming after us?" Tom hesitated, torn between his instincts as a journalist and his duty as a father. "We can't just ignore it," he said finally. "If we do, they'll keep getting away with it." Michael looked between his parents, frustration and betrayal etched on his young face. "So we just let them get away with it?" he asked, his voice cracking. Sarah knelt down, taking his hands in hers. "Michael, I know this is hard, but you have to trust us. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't safe." Unwilling to accept his parents' decision, Michael confided in his best friend, Tyler, the next day at school. Tyler, always eager for an adventure, suggested they return to the woods to gather proof. Michael was hesitant but knew he couldn't let the truth stay buried, literally. Together, the boys ventured back to the site after school, their hearts pounding as they approached the disturbed patch of earth. Armed with a flashlight and Michael's phone for pictures, they began to uncover the truth. But their investigation was cut short when the faint rumble of an engine reached their ears. A patrol car rolled into view, and Rivers stepped out, his sharp eyes scanning the area. The boys barely had time to hide before he began searching the site. Michael and Tyler held their breath, pressed against the cold ground, as Rivers muttered to himself, his hand resting on his gun. Eventually, he left, but the encounter left the boys shaken. Meanwhile, Rivers's paranoia grew. Convinced someone had seen them, he began surveilling the Weston family, his presence a constant, menacing shadow. When Michael's keychain was found near the burial site, Rivers's suspicions were confirmed, and his actions turned even more desperate. One evening, he appeared at the Westons' doorstep under the guise of a friendly visit, his sharp smile failing to mask the threat in his eyes. Tom and Sarah tried to remain calm as Rivers questioned them, but when Michael appeared in the hallway, Rivers's demeanor shifted. Grabbing Michael by the arm, he declared the boy his insurance and dragged him to his car despite Tom's protests. Desperate, Tom called Captain Rene Lewis, a trusted contact in the state police. Rene quickly mobilized a team to track Rivers, but it was a former ally of his, Officer Griggs, who ultimately tipped them off to his location. Racked with guilt, Griggs revealed Rivers's hideout, a remote warehouse on the outskirts of town. A tense standoff ensued as Rene's team surrounded the building. Inside, Rivers paced like a caged animal, his grip on reality slipping as he ranted about survival and betrayal. Griggs, who had accompanied Rivers to the warehouse under duress, saw an opportunity to act. Loosening the ropes binding Michael, he whispered, "When I say go, you run." The moment Rivers was distracted, Griggs shoved Michael toward the exit. The boy sprinted into the arms of waiting officers as the SWAT team stormed the building. Rivers resisted, firing wildly before being subdued and arrested. In the days that followed, Griggs turned whistleblower, providing damning testimony that exposed not only Rivers but also a network of corruption within the department. Michael's bravery and Griggs's decision to come clean led to sweeping reforms, but the Weston family knew the road to healing would be long. The ordeal left emotional scars, but it also strengthened their bond and their belief in the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it comes at a personal cost. With the arrest of Detective Rivers and the unraveling of the corruption he was a part of, the small town found itself at the center of a growing national scandal. News outlets from across the state descended upon the community, shining a glaring spotlight on the events that had unfolded. Michael Weston, despite his young age, was thrust into the public eye as a reluctant hero. Reporters camped outside the Weston family's modest home, their cameras and microphones ready to capture every word, while journalists attempted to piece together the deeper story of corruption that Rivers had orchestrated. Michael's parents, Tom and Sarah, were adamant about protecting their son from the overwhelming attention. They restricted his interactions with the media and refused interviews, insisting that their priority was his safety and emotional recovery. But the world beyond their home wasn't so easily kept at bay. Rumors swirled about what Rivers might have been covering up and who else in the department might have been complicit. Meanwhile, Captain Rene Lewis, leading the state investigation, found herself navigating a labyrinth of lies, blackmail, and fear as she worked to dismantle the web of corruption. Michael's return to school was far from normal. He had always been a quiet, inquisitive boy who loved the outdoors and photography, but now he was seen as something else entirely. His classmates whispered about him in the hallways, their eyes wide with curiosity and awe. Some treated him like a celebrity, while others kept their distance, as though being associated with him might somehow drag them into the trouble. Michael's best friend, Tyler, remained loyal and supportive, but even he struggled to understand the weight Michael was carrying. "You're a hero, Mike," Tyler told him one day as they sat on the swings at the local park, away from prying eyes. "You helped catch a murderer." Michael shook his head, staring at the ground. "I don't feel like a hero," he muttered. "I just wanted to do the right thing. But now everything's different. My parents are scared all the time, reporters won't leave us alone, and I can't stop thinking about what I saw." Tyler nodded, unsure of how to respond. For all his bravado during their adventure, even he couldn't fathom the enormity of what Michael had been through. At home, the tension in the Weston household was palpable. Tom threw himself into assisting Captain Lewis, digging through his old journalist contacts to provide leads and context for the investigation. Sarah, however, was less enthusiastic about his involvement. The memory of Rivers standing in their living room, gun in hand, still haunted her, and she feared the repercussions of stirring the pot even further. "You're putting us all at risk," she told Tom one evening as they argued quietly in the kitchen, careful not to wake Michael. "We've already been threatened. What if there's someone else out there, someone worse than Rivers, who decides to come after us?" Tom placed his hands on her shoulders, his expression determined. "I know you're scared, Sarah. I am too. But if we don't help expose this, if we don't stand up now, then everything Michael went through will have been for nothing. This isn't just about us, it's about making sure no one else has to go through what we did." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded reluctantly, knowing he was right, even if the thought terrified her. As the investigation progressed, Captain Lewis began to uncover just how deep the corruption ran. Rivers had been at the center of a scheme involving bribes, falsified evidence, and even connections to organized crime. He had used his position to silence those who posed a threat to his operations, and many officers under his command had either turned a blind eye or actively participated out of fear. Lewis knew that taking Rivers down was only the first step. The real challenge would be holding everyone else accountable. Her team worked tirelessly, piecing together years of evidence and tracking down witnesses willing to testify. One of those witnesses was Darren Griggs. Racked with guilt over his role in Rivers's crimes, Griggs had agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for leniency. In his testimony, he detailed how Rivers had manipulated and threatened him, turning him into an unwilling accomplice. "He had dirt on everyone," Griggs admitted during an interview with Lewis. "And if he didn't have something on you, he made sure to find it, or make it up. I was too scared to stand up to him. But now I want to make things right." Griggs's decision to come clean was a turning point in the case. His detailed account provided the investigators with a roadmap to unravel the network Rivers had built, leading to a series of arrests and resignations within the department. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. High-ranking officials who had ignored or enabled Rivers's actions were forced to step down, and the state launched a full-scale review of the department's policies and procedures. The community, once divided in its trust of law enforcement, began to rally around the idea of change. Protests and town hall meetings became a regular occurrence, with residents demanding transparency and accountability. Tom Weston, who had once been a voice for justice through his journalism, found himself drawn back into the role, using his platform to amplify the community's concerns and push for reform. For Michael, the attention and chaos surrounding the case took a toll. Nightmares of the burial site and Rivers's menacing gaze plagued his sleep, leaving him exhausted and on edge. His parents noticed the change in him and sought help, enrolling him in therapy to process the trauma. At first, Michael was reluctant to open up, but over time, he began to find solace in talking to someone who could help him make sense of his experiences. "It's okay to feel scared," his therapist told him during one session. "What you went through was terrifying, and it's normal to feel overwhelmed. But you showed incredible courage, Michael. You stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. That's something to be proud of." Slowly, Michael started to heal. He returned to his photography, finding comfort in the beauty of nature, and began spending more time with Tyler, rediscovering the simple joys of childhood. Meanwhile, Captain Lewis faced mounting pressure as the trial of Detective Rivers approached. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of Griggs and the evidence provided by Michael and his family. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial, the air heavy with anticipation. Rivers, who had always exuded an air of control, now looked weary and defeated as he sat at the defense table. When Michael took the stand, his small frame seemed even smaller under the weight of the moment. But as he recounted what he had seen that fateful day, his voice steadied despite the fear. He reminded everyone in the room of the power of truth. The jury deliberated for days, but when the verdict was finally read, guilty on all charges, the relief was palpable. Rivers was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and the community breathed a collective sigh of relief. In the months that followed, the town began to rebuild. Reforms were implemented within the police department, and new leadership emerged, committed to restoring trust. The Weston family found a sense of peace, though the memories of their ordeal lingered. Michael, now more confident and resilient, began using his photography to tell stories of courage and hope, determined to inspire others to stand up for what's right. And though the scars of the past would never fully fade, the Westons knew they had emerged stronger, bound by their love for each other and their unwavering belief in the power of justice. In the wake of the trial and Detective Rivers's conviction, the ripple effects of his crimes continued to unfold. The Weston family, while beginning to heal, faced the lingering impact of being at the center of such a monumental case. Michael's newfound sense of confidence from his testimony was a stark contrast to the initial hesitancy and fear he had felt when first thrust into the spotlight. However, this wasn't the end of his story. The media frenzy that had consumed the town shifted focus as the revelations of corruption widened, but Michael and his family still struggled to regain a semblance of normalcy. For the Westons, normal was no longer an option. It had been replaced by a cautious resilience and a determination to move forward. Tom Weston, emboldened by the success of the trial, fully immersed himself in his renewed role as a journalist and community advocate. His articles began to focus on systemic corruption beyond Rivers and the small-town police department. With a sharp pen and an unyielding sense of duty, Tom exposed deeper issues plaguing the state and called for widespread reform. His writing ignited discussions and inspired protests in neighboring communities, where similar patterns of abuse of power were uncovered. However, this resurgence in his career came at a cost. Tom was no stranger to threats, but the intensity of the backlash this time was far greater. Anonymous messages, cryptic phone calls, and veiled threats directed at his family made him question whether he had put his loved ones at risk again. Sarah, ever the protector of her family, voiced her concerns frequently, imploring Tom to be careful. "You've done enough, Tom," she would say late at night as they sat together in the quiet of their living room. "You've proven your point. We need to think about Michael, about our family's safety. He's only a kid, and we've already asked so much of him." But for Tom, stopping wasn't an option. He couldn't shake the feeling that the work was unfinished, that allowing complacency would only embolden those who operated in the shadows. "I'm doing this for him," Tom would respond, gesturing toward Michael's room upstairs. "For you. For every family who deserves to live without fear of the people who are supposed to protect them. We've seen what happens when we stay silent." Sarah understood his drive, even if it terrified her. She began to channel her energy into creating a safe and stable environment at home, determined to give Michael the childhood he still deserved, despite everything they had been through. Michael, meanwhile, began to use his experience to find his own voice. Though initially hesitant, he grew comfortable speaking to smaller groups at school and community events, sharing his story and encouraging others to stand up for what was right, even when it felt impossible. With Tyler's support, he founded a local youth group focused on community service and awareness. The group, called Bright Horizons, brought together kids from different backgrounds to work on projects ranging from cleaning up the park to creating public murals depicting themes of courage and unity. Through these activities, Michael found a sense of purpose and began to see himself not as a victim of circumstance, but as someone capable of creating change. "You're like a real-life superhero," Tyler joked one day as they painted a mural on the side of a community center. Michael laughed, shaking his head. "I'm not a superhero," he said. "I just didn't want to stay quiet. That's something anyone can do." Despite his outward progress, Michael still grappled with the emotional weight of what he had witnessed. His therapy sessions continued, providing him with a safe space to unpack his feelings and navigate the complex mix of pride, guilt, and lingering fear. His therapist encouraged him to use his photography as a means of processing his emotions, which led to an idea that would eventually become a turning point for him. Michael decided to create a photo series titled Truth Unearthed, inspired by the events that had changed his life. The series featured stark, black and white images of everyday people and places in the town, juxtaposed with written stories of resilience and integrity. Each photograph was accompanied by a short description, capturing the humanity behind the headlines. One image showed a local shopkeeper who had once stood up to an extortion scheme, while another depicted a teacher who had mentored troubled students despite the challenges of a failing school system. The project gained traction, and soon Michael's work was featured in. As time passed, the Weston family continued to heal, carrying with them the lessons they had learned through their ordeal. Their lives, though forever changed, settled into a rhythm that embraced both hope and resilience. Michael's photo series, Truth Unearthed, gained widespread acclaim, eventually touring neighboring cities and being featured in a national youth arts program. The project became more than an outlet for his emotions, it transformed into a platform for stories of courage and perseverance, connecting people across communities and sparking dialogues about integrity, justice, and standing up against corruption. At one exhibit, a teacher approached Michael with her students, expressing how his bravery inspired them to create a similar initiative in their own town. For the first time, Michael truly grasped the ripple effect of his actions. Meanwhile, Tom's relentless pursuit of exposing corruption expanded beyond the town. His investigative pieces drew the attention of major news outlets, allowing him to collaborate on projects that pushed for systemic reforms on a state and national level. Despite the heightened risks, he found solace in knowing his work was making a tangible difference. Sarah, though still wary of the dangers their family faced, found ways to channel her own strength. She joined a local advocacy group, helping other families affected by systemic failures and becoming a quiet but formidable force in the fight for justice. Together, she and Tom became a team not just for their family, but for their community, blending their strengths to create change while ensuring Michael had the support he needed to thrive. At home, the Westons found new ways to reconnect. They adopted simple rituals that reinforced their bond, family dinners where they shared their highs and lows, weekend hikes where they could simply enjoy each other's presence, and quiet evenings by the fire, reflecting on how far they had come. While the shadows of their past lingered, they learned to live alongside them, drawing strength from their collective perseverance. Ethan, now in high school, occasionally volunteered at local organizations inspired by the youth group he and Tyler had founded. Though he still faced moments of anxiety, particularly in the presence of authority figures, therapy and the unwavering support of his family gave him the tools to process and move forward. His once shy demeanor had evolved into a quiet confidence, making him a leader among his peers in ways that felt natural and earned. Detective Renee Lewis, having spearheaded reforms within the department, visited the Westons one evening to thank them for their courage. "You may never fully realize the impact you've had," she told them, her voice earnest. "But this town is different because of you. And for that, I'm grateful." Michael's face lit up with a mix of pride and humility. As they watched Lewis drive away, Tom turned to Michael. "You see, it was worth it." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's not over yet, though. There's always more to do." That night, as Michael sat by his window, watching the stars dot the night sky, he felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of peace. He realized that while he couldn't change the past, he had the power to shape the future, not just for himself, but for others. With his family beside him and the lessons of their journey etched into his heart, he knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they had proven that truth, no matter how buried or fragile, could always find its way into the light. The story of the Weston family resonates deeply with the challenges we often face in life when confronted with injustices, moral dilemmas, and the fear of standing up against powerful systems. Just as Michael and his family had to navigate an uncertain path, balancing the risks of exposing corruption with the importance of doing what was right, many of us find ourselves in situations where we must choose between convenience and courage. In my own life, this story reflects the importance of resilience and the understanding that standing for truth often comes at a cost, but it also brings growth, healing, and a deeper sense of purpose. Whether it's addressing issues within my community, workplace, or personal relationships, the lessons from this narrative remind me to remain steadfast and to rely on the support of those closest to me. One of the most significant takeaways from the story is the power of unity and communication within a family. Michael's family faced immense pressure and fear, but they ultimately persevered because they leaned on one another, shared their vulnerabilities, and found strength in their collective resolve. This is a lesson I often apply in my own life when I face overwhelming circumstances. It's a reminder to communicate openly with the people I trust, to ask for help when I need it, and to support those around me who might also be struggling. No one can face life's challenges alone, and the strength of a united family, or even a chosen family of close friends, can make the difference between feeling defeated and finding the courage to keep moving forward. Another theme that stands out is the importance of action, even in the face of fear. Michael was young and scared, but his determination to do the right thing became the catalyst for uncovering the truth and initiating change. In my life, I've learned that fear is a natural response to uncertainty or danger, but it shouldn't paralyze me from making decisions or pursuing goals that align with my values. When I'm faced with situations where I'm afraid to speak up or take a stand, I remind myself of Michael's courage and the ripple effect that one small act of bravery can have. Whether it's addressing an injustice I've witnessed or taking steps toward a daunting personal goal, the key is to act with integrity and intention, even when it feels uncomfortable. The story also underscores the importance of perseverance and the willingness to adapt. Tom and Sarah, Michael's parents, initially struggled with how to handle the situation. They feared for their safety and debated whether silence would protect their family. However, they eventually realized that ignoring the truth would only prolong the danger and their own emotional turmoil. This mirrors the challenges I face when dealing with long-term problems or setbacks. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and to want to give up, but this story reminds me that progress often comes through persistence, careful planning, and seeking the right allies. It's a lesson in staying committed to what matters, even when the path forward feels uncertain. Finally, this narrative teaches the importance of self-care and emotional well-being during times of stress. Michael and his family endured trauma that could have easily left them fractured, but they took deliberate steps to heal and reconnect. For me, this is a reminder that even in the busiest or most challenging periods of my life, I need to make time to process my emotions, rest, and find ways to recharge. Whether it's spending quality time with loved ones, pursuing creative outlets, or seeking professional support when needed, taking care of my mental and emotional health is essential for staying resilient. The advice I would take from this story and apply to my life is to always strive for balance between courage and caution. While it's vital to stand up for what's right and push for change, it's equally important to consider the risks and take calculated steps to protect myself and those I care about. I would remind myself to stay grounded in my values, to seek support from people I trust, and to approach challenges with patience and determination. The Weston's journey demonstrates that even in the face of adversity, it's possible to find strength, healing, and hope when you remain true to your principles and nurture the relationships that sustain you. Their story inspires me to keep moving forward, even when the road is difficult, knowing that every step I take toward truth and justice can make a meaningful difference.
Thank you for watching. If you have any comments, please comment below the video. Please subscribe to the channel to support us.